Today we're living in the post-industrial age. Our businesses are competing in the global economy. Our workers are part of a global labor force. And the things that we've relied upon for our success, machines, technology, and capital, they're readily available around the world. And our competitors have dramatically improved the quality of their workforce by copying us. For example, in 1950, American children went to school more than anyone else in the world, 180 days, 5.5 hours a day. Japanese schools were open 120 days, 3.5 hours a day. 40 years later, our children go to school how long? 180 days, 5.5 hours a day. In Japan, it's now 220 days, 8 hours a day. In Europe, it's 240 days. And in Indonesia, it's 270 days. Now, all other things being equal in the new economy, we could still expect to compete and win playing the old industrial game. But they're not equal. If you tour a VCR factory in Seoul, South Korea today, you will find a state-of-the-art equipment run by skilled workers who are willing to work for 1/10 of the annual American wage. Now, if you're in this industry, that's not good news, but it gets worse, because the Chinese have now entered the marketplace, and their people are willing to work hard for exactly 1/10 of the annual wage of a Korean. 1/100th of the American wage. We will never make a VCR in this country again, ever. These jobs and millions like them are going to reliable, literate, cheap labor abroad. As a result of these pressures, American business and labor leaders have realized that we must shift from the old methods of mass production to flexible, just-in-time delivery of high-quality products and customized services. This shift is being accompanied by fundamental changes in the organization of work. We are moving from low-skilled, high-controlled systems to new high-performance work organizations. These are characterized by integration of traditionally separate functions, flatter hierarchies, decentralization of responsibility, and greater employee involvement at all levels. This in turn has changed what workers need to know and who needs to know it. As hammers and wrenches are replaced by numbers, symbols, and keyboards, frontline workers find themselves facing intellectual challenges. They need more than manual dexterity and a mechanical aptitude. They need a conceptual understanding of their work. They need to acquire, analyze, and apply information to a continually changing array of problems. They need to develop thinking skills to identify new problems, new products, and new services before our competitors do. And they will need to do all this working together. The Department of Labor estimates that 60% of America's frontline workers will work together in self-directed teams by the year 2000. These teams operate and maintain equipment and perform their own quality control. Teammates work together to set goals, develop budgets, solve problems, and customize services and products. Effective teammates must come to the job with a good grasp of how physical and social systems work. They must have developed the capacity for reflective collaboration. I want to make it clear that I'm not talking about that small handful of thinkers, but rather the vast majority of American workers in the 21st century. That includes most of your graduates. Our system of education needs to change because the economy is rapidly rendering our schools, your schools, seriously out of step with the time. And yet, people will come up to me and say things like, hey, it was okay for me, it's okay for my kids. Or, my personal favorite, if schools could just be the way they used to be in this country, everything would be all right. When I hear people say these things, I say, yeah, pick a year. Well, how about 1950? Those are pretty good schools. They might have been, but the dropout rate in 1950 in this country was 50%. No, you got to go back to 1920 for the really good schools in this country, Jamie. The dropout rate in America in 1920 was 80%. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, there has never been a time in our history when we provided even a simple majority of America's youth with the quality of education that virtually all of them will need today. Why do people think that it used to be better? It's because everybody got jobs. As recently as 1968, 70% of the entire American workforce was classified as low-skilled or unskilled workers. If you had a strong back and a willingness to work, You could leave school with or without a high school diploma and expect to catch the American dream. Not anymore. The market value of a high school diploma is falling at an alarming rate. According to the Department of Labor, only 4% of the jobs created in the 1990s will be in the low-skilled category. By the year 2000, less than 13% of all the American jobs will be low-skilled. Where are these people, the majority of your graduates, your future neighbors and taxpayers? Where are they going to go? They won't have the skills necessary to earn anything more than the minimum wage. We have entered an age in which economic productivity and the quality of education cannot be separated. And if all this talk about schools and the economy seems a bit abstract, particularly to those of you who no longer have children in school, listen to this. In 1968, for every one person on Social Security, there were 22 people in the workforce. Not a bad ratio if you retired that year. In just 4 years, for every one person on Social Security, the number of workers in this country will be down to 2. And you can't pick your 2, folks. This discussion about changing our schools and improving student performance is very personal. For the first time in America's history, people are not just interchangeable parts used to develop or exploit our competitive advantage. People are America's competitive advantage. The system of education that we have today must change from the rigid, factory-like selecting and sorting system that wastes human potential to a flexible, high-expectation learning organization that helps all students and staff develop their potential so that they can all become successful, contributing, responsible members of American society. My third answer to the question, why should we change our schools, is that as they have attempted to adapt to social change, our schools have become very confused. And I believe I can prove this point simply by reading this list. The first schools in America were formed around the year 1640 by the Puritans in Massachusetts. These schools were designed to teach reading, writing, arithmetic, and a core set of American values. Those were the days when you could talk about promoting values in the schools without inciting a riot. America's schools did nothing but teach these things for almost 260 years. Then, around the year 1900, policymakers and politicians began to see the schools as a perfect place to assimilate the children of the newly arrived European immigrants and, in the process, do a little social engineering. It was then that our society began to add things to the short list of schools' responsibilities. In the year 1900 to 1910, we added issues of nutrition, immunization, and health to the list of responsibilities. From 1920 to 1940, we added vocational education, the practical arts, physical education, and school lunch programs. Now, we take it for granted today that schools should feed our children lunch, but it was a significant step to shift to the school the responsibility for feeding America's children 1/3 of their daily meals. In the 1950s, we add safety education, driver education, foreign language requirements are strengthened, and sex education is introduced. And if I'm not mistaken, the number of topics that we teach now under sex ed have escalated over the last 40 years. In the 60s, we add consumer education, career education, peace education, leisure and recreation education. I love the 60s. In the 70s, the breakup of the American family accelerates. Special education is mandated by the federal government. We add drug and alcohol abuse education, parent education, character education, and school breakfast programs begin to appear. Now some schools are feeding their kids 2/3 of their daily meals. And in too many of these cases, these are the only decent meals these children are receiving in a day. In the 80s, the floodgates open wide. Keyboarding and computer education, global education, ethnic education, multicultural non-sexist education, English as a second language, bilingual education, early childhood education, full-day kindergarten, preschool programs for children at risk, after-school programs for children of working parents, stranger danger education, sexual abuse prevention education, and child abuse monitoring becomes a legal requirement for all teachers. And finally, so far in the 1990s, we've added HIV/AIDS education, death education, and gang education. And we've not added a single minute to the school year in decades. Schools can't do this, folks. Schools were not designed to raise America's children. And yet you and I both know that even in our best towns, there are parents who are dropping their kids off for pre-K or kindergarten and expecting to pick them up 13 or 14 years later and find fully developed human beings. The system is trying to be all things to all people, and it can't work. We have added all of these non-academic burdens into the envelope of 180 days. In the process, we've stolen academic time without regard to the consequences for learning. And in doing so, we have virtually assured the failure of too many of our students. The system is confused, and it must be changed. This list virtually cries out to people of every community to sit together and decide what's worth knowing in the 1990s and beyond. What is the purpose of school in your community in the information age? We must all come together and meet this challenge. And I am convinced that the place to start, the primary discussion, must center on what it is we believe. What do we believe about ourselves, our schools, and our children? Because in the end, how we plan, how we budget, and ultimately how we act will be based on these beliefs. We must believe that the system can change, or it won't. We must believe that all of our children can learn to much higher levels than they presently demonstrate, or they won't. We must believe that the education and the development of all of our citizens is the most important and potentially the most rewarding enterprise of our generation. I know you are all busy. I know that many of you, especially parents, are hard-pressed even to find the time to come to another meeting. But how you respond to this message, ladies and gentlemen, your willingness to allow your schools to change, and the role that you choose to play in the change process will greatly determine whether or not your town or community succeeds or fails in the coming century. 10 years from now, and it may take that long, I believe it will be obvious which communities in this country rose to the challenge and transformed their schools. Their people, young and old, will be highly educated. Their economies will be robust, and their cultures will be thriving. I hope I just described the future of your town. But I know that somebody is going to have to lead this process. Somebody is going to have to step into the gap between what we're presently doing and what we all have in our hearts and minds as our most noble vision of what we can do and of what we can become. Somebody is going to have to reach out and create a grand partnership in your town of educators and business and labor leaders and parents and non-parents and professionals and the clergy and senior citizens in order that this partnership can create a shared vision rooted not in the past but in the future, a vision that has high expectations for all of our children, a vision that has an effective strategy for change. Somebody is going to have to lead this process in your town, and it's not a politician. It's not a government bureaucrat. It's not a professor. It's not a consultant. Someone is going to have to lead your town into the 21st century so that we all succeed, and I believe in my heart that somebody is you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks a lot.